So, given the popularity of shows like, I don't know what television, so.
I don't have it here.
Okay, but the popularity of shows, 24, One School, and all the other police, and those kinds of shows. Do you see the blurring and the privatization of the security and intelligence services, the privatization of that kind of service affecting the way in which the general public is able to fight back at the corporations?
Well, there's a fusion of corporate and state security services. We have 16 intelligence agencies in the United States, and 70% of the work of those agencies is outsourced to corporations, who, when they are not working for those intelligence agencies, are working for themselves. You have a command center in Wall Street, a multi-billion-dollar command center, where the New York City Police is working with corporate security together. I mean, when we were arrested outside of Goldman Sachs, you had these Goldman Sachs security officials who frankly reminded me of the Stasi. So that of course is a phenomenon that's extremely frightening when corporate forces essentially have not only access but control of internal security. I mean, the FISA Amendment Act, which retroactively made legal what under our Constitution was traditionally illegal, the warrantless wiretapping, monitoring, and eavesdropping of tens of millions of American citizens, was pushed through by the telecommunications company, like Verizon and AT&T, because they had handed over personal information to the Bush administration. There were several suits in lower courts working their way up, and clearly unconstitutional. They didn't want to pay it, so they put this retroactive clause in, pushed it through Congress, bipartisan. Obama voted for it. It's now, we've sued the government. I'm one of the plaintiffs, I think Naomi Klein is too, on the ACLU lawsuit, which is about to be heard for the Supreme Court. We now know that there's a supercomputer out in Utah where all this stuff is being held. Glenn Greenwald, who's quite good, estimates that there's 1.7 billion pieces of data, phone, email, that goes in every day into this supercomputer. And that's what happens. I mean, they know what's coming. They have, the National Security Council, knows the political, economic effects of climate. They know all that. And what they're doing as rapidly as they can is rewriting the legal system to make it impossible for us to respond. That's what happened in Chicago with the NATO summit. If you look at what Rahm Emanuel put in place, and you can't even be 3 people on a street corner. And that's what they're trying to do. And look at the G8 summit in Toronto. I mean, this is crosses borders. Want to do one more question? Okay, go ahead.
You talked about working with prisoners and how that was strengthening you. So if you could just talk a little bit about the way that you've been integrated or reintegrated heart and mind-wise, just as an emergent.
Well, first of all, I spent 20 years in the developing world. Central America, covered the war in El Salvador for 5 years, 7 years in the Middle East, much of that time in Gaza and the territories. I was, of course, in Yugoslavia. And so that's very healthy for a white male American to see the cruelty of empire, how it works, and also to spend 2 decades with people who aren't white. And when you develop close relationships, as I have with people, for instance, in Gaza, you have the capacity to leave, but they don't. I mean, one of the reasons why I would never vote for Obama is just on the wars alone. Because I had friends, without being melodramatic, who died in Iraq. And I want to go back. And I want to say, or at least honestly be able to say to them that I did everything in my power, however futile, to fight these wars. In the hope that I will have at least earned the right to ask for their forgiveness. You cannot, I've taught 3 courses now, and I just finished one in this prison, and in New Jersey they segregate the prisons according to gang affiliation. So these prisoners are African American and they're all Bloods, or the Bloods gangs. And they've never been taught their own history. So I taught them, I submitted my form to the prison authorities and told them, I want to teach American history. And they said, oh, that's great. I went out and I bought every inmate a copy of Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States. And I give 90-minute talks, and I would be, and Zinn is really cognizant of the African American experience, indeed of all of the oppressed throughout that book. It's quite a remarkable book. And I would hear the inmates go, damn, we've been lied to. Last course I taught was on Reconstruction and Jim Crow. I used Leon Litwack, amazing books, After the Storm, and then Trouble in Mind, comes from an Old Muddy Waters song, on Jim Crow. He won the Pulitzer for After the Storm. I actually think Trouble in Mind is better. But it's an incredible, those are incredible works. And again, they had never been taught their own history. And we were going through the text, and there was huge numbers of African American women were raped by white slaveholders, both during slavery and then afterwards. So that even Mary Chestnut in her diary talks about visiting different plantations, and there were always a couple dozen mulatto children running around. And of course, what was so deeply pernicious is that they'd sell their own children. And in that classroom in the prison, one of the prisoners raises his hands and goes, is that why some of us are light-skinned? And suddenly in that room, for the first time, these men had to cope with the fact that some of them had slaveholder blood with it. I mean, I gotta be honest, there are days that I walked out of that prison class and I just sat in the parking lot and cried for 20 minutes. Because you had all this native intelligence, passion, and they had just, every door had been shut to them. Every single door had been shut to them. I saw the same thing in Gaza. It's why I'm so fierce on the Israeli war crimes that are committed against the Palestinians, because I've spent months of my life in Gaza, where they can't leave, they can't work, they're sleeping 10 to a room in a concrete hovel. There is no way left for them to affirm themselves as young men, other than as a shaheed or as a martyr. Because at least if they blow themselves up, for one day Hamas will bring in a few truckloads of white plastic chairs and run banners across the street, and people will put their pictures up and they'll be somebody. That's it. When you shut down all of those avenues of affirmation and you leave only that one left, essentially death. And that is the great failing of what Israel has done. I'm not going to defend suicide bombing, I wouldn't. Yet at the same time, to understand is not to condone. And we have to understand the forces of oppression before we can finally fight.